Amandla, amandla, gawethu, gawethu. Marco, we're good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nhlakanipho Mahlangu. I'm an employee at CanRed, and I will be facilitating today's event. We are here for a book launch. And who's going to explain what we are here to do is my colleague Vuyo Dotana.
Amandla, awethu. Amandla, awethu. Thank you very much. Program Director, Mr. Msomi, Honorable Zungula, and to our online audience. So mine is very brief and it's very simple. I'm just here to give an overview of why we are here. And the reason why we're here is because in less than a month, South Africa will be hosting the 15th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. And this is in the midst of global controversy and political turmoil over Russia's involvement in Ukraine and South Africa's neutral stance on the matter. As we might know, as much as our stance might seem neutral, it is important to note that South Africa does have historical ties with Russia and still maintains positive trade relations with the West. This is but one of the key factors that influence South Africa's foreign policy on the matter. One of the key trends that we are seeing in global politics today is the eastward shift in the global political economy. One can argue that this migration can be attributed to the growing power and influence of the Shanghai Cooperation, as well as the significant strides that are being made by the BRICS economies, i.e., the establishment of the New Development Bank, which is financing key infrastructural and developmental projects around the world. This is also at the backdrop of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which will see the rise of the African Union's vision of an economically vibrant and united Africa. According to the Programme on Infrastructural Development in Africa, the continent is quickly expanding and is ready to become an economic success story and model for other parts of the world. However, the continent's huge infrastructure deficit is preventing it from progressing. In Africa, just 34% of the people have access to road transport compared to 50% in other emerging countries, and transportation expenses are twice as high. Only 30% of the population of Africa has access to electricity, as compared to the 70 to 90% in other emerging countries. Also, only 5% of farmland is irrigated, indicating that water resources are underutilized. The internet penetration rate in the developing world is only 6%, as compared to an average of 40% elsewhere. This comparison paints a problematic picture about the state of Africa's infrastructure when compared with other emerging economies. Now, in this discussion, comrades and colleagues, we're hoping that some of these questions can be answered. Number one, how can BRICS and the African continent drive global change? How can we ensure that the BRICS and African partnership lives up to its potential? And what are the potential blocks of progress to ensure that BRICS and Africa are shaping the future? And these are some of the questions that I'm hoping that our speakers will be able to touch base on. Now, as I introduce the main speaker, which is Wandile Msomi, I want you to know one thing. He is a political science graduate from the Nelson Mandela University. He is a researcher and geopolitical commentator for local radio stations in KwaZulu-Natal. He has been exposed to geopolitical research for many years and has worked with the UN's Wafuna in organizing research and training students from around the world on how to simulate the UN for FUNA's annual bundle, United Nations, twice in New York and online. In 2019, Wandile Msomi also received an IYDC Excellence Award at the University of Ghana for his research on child marriages. He is also currently a law student at the University of Witwatersrand and is in his penultimate year. Please give him a round of applause. And on the right, he's a man who does not need any introductions, but I'll introduce him nonetheless. We have Honorable Vuyelwethu Zungula, a Nelson Mandela University alumni who holds a BCom degree from the Nelson Mandela University and a business management honors degree from the University of South Africa. Honorable Zungula is currently the president of the African Transformation Movement and a member of parliament since 2019. In parliament, Zungula is also a member of the following committees: the Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services, and the Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources and Energy. He also sits on the Portfolio Committee on Small Business Development. Now, how this discussion is going to go, we're going to allocate 35 minutes to Mr. Wandile Msomi to give us insights on his book, and then Mr. Zungula is going to be given 20 minutes to respond. And then one of the contributors to the book, Mr. Msomi, is going to be given 10 minutes, right, just to make a contribution to the discussion. And then from there onwards, we'll follow up with a Q&A. Without any further ado, I would like to give it over to Mr. Msomi to lead us in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, bro. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, family that's here, friends, students, learners, high school learners. I heard that the high school learners were also here. I'm very happy. I wasn't expecting this council chamber to be this full. So I'm quite excited to see all of you here. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to CanRed also for facilitating and bringing us here and facilitating this discussion for us. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Vuyelwethu and your team. Also, thank you to Honorable Zungula for being here. I know you have a busy schedule, but you took time out to be here with us. So I appreciate that very much. I do not take it lightly. So thank you very much, sir. So I think first I will start with how the book came about before we get into the beautiful stuff. Someone once said the boring stuff. Before we get into the boring stuff, perhaps if we could talk about just how the book started, the idea behind it, when the idea started, and just the works. So I've always been interested in geopolitics. I've always been interested in politics first, and then it grew to geopolitics. I think around the times of the Obama White House, when Obama was coming in and Bush was leaving, that sparked a lot of interest for me, which obviously grew with what was happening in the world. I think like 2-3 years later after that, it was Gaddafi and all the things that were happening in the world at that time. So that sparked a whole lot of interest for me, and I've been doing a whole lot of reading, a whole lot of research, engaging with geopolitics from that time till now. It has been a passion for me ever since. So in that way, I've always had people come to me. They would ask me, whenever something is happening around the world, They would ask for my input. They would ask me to explain X, Y, Z. And it's always difficult to explain. For example, you look at issues like Russia and Ukraine, and when you want to explain it to somebody, you start with the history. And some people don't have the patience for the history. But you can't understand what's happening now without the historical context. So it's almost like starting a movie at the end, you know. So, and then I said, well, you know, if I could write something down, it wasn't even a book at the time. If I can write something down that could sort of lay a foundation, that could give that historical context that we often lack in our discussions, whether it's politics, geopolitics, whatever we're discussing at the time. So that is when the idea was born, that let's write a book, let's lay a foundation for geopolitics today and give a whole lot of historical context to the many issues that happened, including Libya, Ukraine, Russia today, Middle East, and Middle Eastern politics is very complex, but of course we try to simplify it. And just on that point, the way the book was written, it was written in a way that anybody can understand it. So you don't need a PhD. We have a whole lot of those books where you have to read twice or even 3 times just to understand what it says. So we said, let's just cut all of that and let's use normal, everyday language and let's explain what's going on in the world right now. So the title of the book is Splendid Isolation. So I have a friend who, from time to time, one of the people who, when I had ideas, when I was still writing, I would call and they'll stay with me for hours on the phone, just with bouncing ideas off each other. He always asked me, and I made a joke about it recently, but he always asked me, so where does this splendid isolation come from? Why splendid isolation? What's this splendid isolation? I always explain it to him. He always seems to forget somehow. But splendid isolation is a foreign, it's a foreign affairs, it's a policy. It's an international relations policy where country does not align itself with anybody. That they own allegiance to no one. They look neither east nor west, sometimes east, sometimes west, but they stand in splendid isolation. They are loyal unto themselves. So the book is a question. Should Africa align itself with the East, the former communists, or maybe current communists, the Russians, the Chinese, or should we align ourselves with the Western powers, the Americans, the British, the French, or should we align with ourselves? Should we align with ourselves? I know that one of the presidents in the 1960s, I think it was Nkrumah, if I'm not mistaken, who said Africa should look neither east nor west, but unto herself. So, or should Africa stand in splendid isolation? If the East today is correct, then the East is correct. If the Russians are correct, if the Americans are correct, we owe allegiance to nobody but ourselves and that situation at that time. So the book is a question. That's a question we are posing, right? So just going into perhaps some of the things that we raise in the book. Perhaps let me just lay a foundation a little bit. Again, I'm a stickler for foundation and context before we get into the meat. Otherwise, we will get lost, right? So you might have, some of you might have heard us speak about a U.S.-led world order. It's cliched now. Everyone just says it's a U.S.-led world order, new world order, WHO and all that kind of stuff. But what does it mean? What does it mean when we say this is the world system today? The world is led by the U.S. What does it mean? Does it mean the U.S. said that the U.S. put its hand up and say, I nominate myself to lead the world? What does this mean? And most importantly, when did this happen? The US was never always the leader. When did this shift happen? So at the end of the Second World War, or just before the Second World War, before we get to the end of the Second World War, the US wasn't the leader of the world. It showed potential. It was clear what they were trying to do and what they wanted to achieve, but they weren't the leader at that time. Before the war, we were under the British Empire. Someone once said Britain is now the grandfather. The real father is now the US. At the time, Britain, I mean, they used to say the British Empire, the sun does not set on the British Empire, because they were everywhere, right? And then it went down after the Second World War. Now, I need you to have this mental picture of the world after Second World War. Europe specifically, because Africa, we were still colonized at the time. Europe was ravished. The economy was poor. They needed a savior. They needed a messiah. The world system at that time, there was a vacuum. You know, Britain's power had went down. France had went down. The entire continent of Europe, essentially. They were facing revolt in the colonies. Natives were fighting. They were losing control, right? So it was a bad time. This is the 40s now. This is where the US capitalized. Now, now this is the most important thing. 1944, right? 1944, the US establishes the IMF and the World Bank. 1945, the United Nations was established. 1947, NATO was created. These were institutions. The US was building institutions that would be pillars to hold up its empire. They were building an empire. And you know, look at South Africa, for example. We're a democracy. We have institutions that maintain this democracy: the public protector, auditor general. You know, all these institutions. Whenever one goes rogue, we still have these institutions that can call the other back into line. So, institutions are pillars that hold up that system. So now the U.S. world order is held up by several pillars, but three main pillars. It is. We look at the global economy. That is, I put IMF there, I put World Bank there, I put the dollar as a reserve, a reserve currency, which all of this was to control the economy. Now, you can't control the economy and just leave it at that. You have to have a military. Now, your military alone can't do it. You need a military alliance, a very strong one. This is when NATO was created, right, in 1947, to sort of maintain now this American empire, right? And then the other part of this is, so now you'd know, obviously, now with NATO, and when we say NATO is led by America, this is true. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not just saying. NATO is led by America. NATO is almost like an American military. Right? So Europe outsourced its economy to the US. The US came and saved it. I mean, the Marshall Plan, if I'm not mistaken, America saved Europe's economy, then went into Europe outsourcing its own security to America, or giving America a chance to basically to take care of Europe's security. So that's NATO. But there's another part, there's another pillar, and that's global norms, just what's normal. What's a norm in the West might not be a norm in South Africa, for instance, right? But then you have these institutions that dictate norms for everybody, almost like an umbrella approach. But the truth is, something works in the US, doesn't work in the Arabian Peninsula. Something works in Africa, it doesn't necessarily work in Europe. right? So they created institutions like the United Nations and also just other institutions that come out of the United Nations to maintain these global norms and what should be normal. So to almost westernize the world culturally, it just if it's in America, it should be everywhere. If it's shunned upon in somewhere in Africa, in the Middle East, Latin America, then it's a human rights violation. It's this and that. So these are the three main pillars. Perhaps let me just touch on the global economy, right? And then I'm going to go back to security in a second. So let's look at perhaps the IMF. The IMF, when I say the IMF was created to maintain US, to sustain the American empire. Remember, the 40s was a time of trying to suppress communism, trying to spread capitalism, right? So then they created this institution that if African countries or Latin America or even Europe, if they wanted assistance from these institutions, they would have to agree to certain conditions that the United States places on the countries that require help from the IMF and the World Bank and so on. What are these conditions? Well, you have to privatize, fiscal surveillance. We have to have a say in certain policies. So now you can't talk about nationalization, for example. They say, no, you can't nationalize. Part of the conditions when we gave you these billions, you agreed on privatization. You agreed on these free market ideas. So it's a very invasive or intrusive institution. It doesn't give you money and lay back. They're very involved in trying to push their own systems and their own way of thinking. Now, this often, their structural adjustment programs is an example. Now, these often keep Africa, right? They often keep Africa at an impoverished level, often keeps Africa on its knees, right? So now, the world then said, so this has been going on really for about 80 years, right? For 80 years, we have not really, by saying we, now I'm looking at we as a world with the IMF and the World Bank, the IMF and the World Bank has not been able to present one model country to say we have been here, we have been around for 80 years, and here's a country in Africa who followed our policies, who followed the structural adjustment programs, who privatized. Look at them now. They've been lifted out of poverty into prosperity. Well, that's not the IMF's job, in essence. It's to keep certain countries impoverished while you keep the US at the summit of this American empire. And of course, I did mention the dollar being the reserve currency. That's also part of this control I'm talking about of the United States of America, and obviously supported by Europe. So now when we speak about BRICS, now I can get to BRICS, my favorite subject. So I did say I'm obsessed with just having the context and the history. So now enter BRICS. Enter BRICS, the new development bank. I remember we once had a talk a few years ago at the Rendezvous, I think international, yeah, that side. So we had a talk about BRICS. This was 2018, I think. One of the speakers, I forgot the gentleman's name, but I remember sitting and listening to him. He said, no, BRICS is not an alternative. It's just a new thing. on the side. Don't look at it as an alternative. I remember sitting there and thinking, well, it really looks like an alternative. But of course, it was the early days, so I forgive him for that mistake. It was still early days. Maybe some people hadn't seen the signs yet. The BRICS then comes up with a new development bank. No matter how you look at it, this is a direct competitor to the IMF and the World Bank, right? So what is the difference? Someone else said, well, it's going to work the same. It's a bank, So, well, does the new development bank have these structural adjustment programs? How invasive are they? What about fiscal surveillance and things like that that come with the IMF and the World Bank? So the nature of Russia, China, India, just BRICS nations, particularly China and Russia, unlike the Americans and the British, they don't necessarily care much about what you do in your country. They want to do business, right? So they don't care whether they agree. In fact, they don't even ask themselves whether they agree or disagree with what you're doing. They're interested in just doing business. And that's the approach of BRICS. A real true partnership, right? That is a real true partnership that does not intrude in your business partner's domestic affairs, right? This is polar opposite to what the Americans do. The Americans, if they give you something, there's 3 books with demands and whatever and checklists. If they're going to give you something, that is not, comparatively speaking, that's not the approach the Chinese and the Russians are coming with. We are now speaking about de-dollarization. What does this mean? Well, I'm not an economist. But to me, it did not make sense to me why, if I'm South Africa and this is China, why we have to trade using the dollar. You don't use the dollar, you use the Chinese yuan, I use the rand, you use the ruble, you use whatever. If we are trading here, none of us here use the dollar. How does the dollar enter into the equation, right? So is it a crazy idea to say, hey, China, can we trade in our own currency? And the Americans don't want that because the involvement of the dollar in that transaction gives them power, right? So they have power to sanction, right? If America doesn't like you, you're going to feel it, right? But if South Africa doesn't like you, So, and that's why Americans are terrified of de-dollarization, because it means diluting America's power in the world. It doesn't mean we're going to remove the dollar. Now the dollar is now going to fall and it's going to disappear. No, it's just now there are new alternatives now popping up. So they're not the only ones. So now when new ones are popping up, they get diluted. They don't like that. That means they can't unilaterally sanction Russia. They can't unilaterally sanction Iraq, Iran, North Korea. Now if they want to sanction these countries if we could use our own currencies, you can only a sanction would only work if we all agree, right? Right now, countries get sanctioned, and there's only 1 or 2 countries that actually want those sanctions there. And economies are crippling. Zimbabwe is on its knees, and there are so many other countries on their knees. And Russia is really lucky because they had a very good, well, depending on who you listen to, they had a really, comparatively speaking, they had a really good economy, right? So they could get sanctioned by the US. Obviously, it's going to hit them here and there, but the West is also dependent on Russia, so it's different. The West is not necessarily dependent on Zimbabwe, for example, but they very much dependent on a country like Russia for gas, with Germany and the Nord Stream pipeline. You know that story. So I remember I was telling Umzo yesterday, and we were speaking about SWIFT and how Russia, they said they were going to remove them from the SWIFT banking system, which was a flop because and we cover it in the book, I think they were able to sanction about probably like 20% of Russian banks. But okay, why? Why haven't they just sanctioned the others? Because they use the others to pay Russia for the gas. So we're not going to sanction the one we use to make payments. Sanctions collapsed, right? But for smaller countries, those sanctions would stick. So that's why I'm saying Russia, in terms of sanctions, has been quite lucky in terms of being able to ride the wave, right? And they're able to, American companies that have left are now being replaced by Russian companies. The Chinese are coming in, India is also now benefiting. I know they had a deal they saved about, we were speaking about this a few days ago, they say India saved about $7 billion in discounts for oil, which really, I think South Africa could benefit from things like that if we could have stronger ties with countries like with Russia, improve those ties. I like the fact where we are saying, no, we're not involved in that. We want peace, but we're going to still do business with these guys, But I want us to do more. We have to have a bigger. There's so much potential there. I mean, when a country can get a $7 billion, can save $7 billion, in discounts. I know South Africa, we could use that money, right? You can think of a lot of things we could do with that money. So why aren't we going there? I mean, we're also speaking about, what is this? We spoke about vaccines, right? There were countries who were willing to give us vaccines for free. They're like, come, take these vaccines. Unfortunately, our government, for some reason, they didn't say no, but they said no. And I say that because they couldn't. What is this? It has to be passed through. Like it has to be given a thumbs up by the regulatory, agencies and so on. And then they were not given a thumbs up. I struggle to understand how can a country like China, with over 1 billion people, have a vaccine that South Africa can approve, and we don't have one. Yet we are able to say. So that's why I'm saying, for me, and I can welcome another view on this, but for me, it doesn't make sense. For me, it was a way of saying no, essentially, right? So I wasn't planning on sticking with the economy part for so long, because I started with saying I'm not an economist so that I can spend like 5 minutes, but once one starts speaking. But yeah, I'm about to, submarine, comrades used to hey, as I submarine. I'm just going to touch on perhaps just security, just a little bit on security. BRICS is not a military alliance. It's an economic alliance, we know this. But on the one hand, Xi Jinping is saying, no, stop these things of military alliances. On the other, Putin is saying, no, we need to neutralize NATO. In as much as we're neutralizing the IMF and the World Bank, if you want to deal with the American empire, neutralize them in all fronts. Neutralize NATO, right? Neutralize the IMF and the World Bank, well, we neutralize the dollar. We're doing that. And I'm hopeful with the summit coming up that we'll be able to pass something progressive on that front. Anyway, it's something that, de-dollarization is something that started a while ago. Just it was hastened by what's going on in Eastern Europe. So that is what, perhaps from my side, what I would wish is for BRICS to look into perhaps forming some kind of a military alliance whereby, so we can't have NATO. What NATO has done to this world, since its inception is, I don't even have a word to describe it. We can look at countries like Libya, Iraq, what they're trying to do now with Russia, because we know what they're trying to do there, provoking Russia, trying to spread, and they've been spreading. They've been spreading since 1955, to recently now, I think, with Sweden, if I'm not mistaken, who are going to be the new partners. So, but also there are military drills. We did military drills with China and Russia, so I'm not promoting war, but the reason why we haven't had a nuclear catastrophe is because there's more than one nuclear power. So once they are neutralized, that's the best like safety mechanism. If I have a gun, you have a gun, I know you won't shoot me, because if you shoot me, I'll shoot back. But if you're the only one who has a gun, I'm not safe. I'm going to dance to your tune. So I'm not promoting violence and living in a world with all sort of weapons, and I just feel if we do that, and I could welcome an opposing view on that, if we do that, if we neutralize, then we'll be able to, I think that's how we will achieve a safer world. So yes, I did say I was submarining, so I'm submarining even deeper now. Now I'm submarining. So thank you very much. We could speak the whole day. BRICS is presenting an alternative. It's presenting something new. I had to paint what the world is and how we got here. So thank you very much for the opportunity, for listening to me. I'm truly, truly grateful. Like I said, I wasn't expecting for it to be a full room. So thank you very much for being here. And perhaps just looking into my personal just reflections on in August next month. Just to summarize, my wish is for us to be able to conclude de-dollarization. Let's have something stable. Let's know what we want. I know that we're trying to expand. We can't be a free-for-all. We need to have established requirements for countries to come in. I know that France wanted to be part of the BRICS summit in August, so I'm waiting for President Ramaphosa's announcement on that, but the Russians have said no, so I don't expect that's going to happen. But we need to have these set requirements. That's what I'm looking forward to with the BRICS summit. It's an alternative. It's a welcomed alternative on my end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me also extend my greetings to the institution, the organization that is hosting us, the students, parents, learners. Before I say anything, I think we need to give a round of applause for Wandile. For not only the historical perspective that is given us on the issue of geopolitics, but for the bravery of writing a book. There's that saying of ours, Ugoba, our stories, if they are forever told by the colonizers or for the oppressors, they'll always take a particular narrative. Now, we are growing, if we are going to have a young person being able to write a book. And by us, I want to also acknowledge and appreciate all of you for coming here, because I think when we are going the right direction if not only are we writing books, but we support each other when our fellow young people are also writing books. Perhaps I could start by saying, before the history of humankind, the question of dominance has always played central to human development. From the earliest times, humans wanted to dominate other humans. Nations wanted to dominate other nations. Therefore, the foundation of geopolitics, it has always been centered around dominance. Now, when the world split into two in 1945, it is unfortunate that Africa was colonized for the longest time, and during that particular time, most of the African states were colonized. Therefore, they did not have the say whether they are going to align with the East or they are going to align with the West. It was dictated to based on who was colonizing you. That is why even from a language perspective, a country which was colonized by the Portuguese will speak Portuguese. A country that has been colonized by the British is going to have English as their official language. So that is how deep the question of colonization has on many African states. Now, when we started fighting for independence as African countries, it was very difficult to choose whether we are going to do business, who we are going to do business with. In the context that the countries that were formerly colonized by the French, they are called the Francophobe countries, right? They are mostly aligned with France. The countries that were formerly colonized by the British, they are also part of the British Commonwealth. Now, that is how, even though those countries gained independence, but there has been some thread that is there to keep that iron steel dominance over those countries through such institutions. So the question of being colonized and the question of dominance is not a question that is limited to you being, or a country being colonized, and you have the people from those countries actually being there in the country. You could rule yourself as a country, but there are some institutions that are kept to ensure that whatever that you do is always in line with the interest of the country that colonized you. So hence you find that in our country, whenever that, in fact, in almost all African countries, whenever there's any talk about, for example, the question of land reform, there'll always be that question of, we are going to sanction you. Who's going to sanction? You find that, remember in the early 2000s, which country had more interest in the Zimbabwean land reform? It was the British, it was UK, the United Kingdom. It was not the Americans, it was not Russians, it was not Chinese, simply because they had those vested interests as the British on their former colony. It is the same thing that is currently happening now, where you have countries that were formerly colonized by France, that some of them, you even find their presidents spend most of their time in France than their respective countries. You find those countries are making some payments to France for something that could not be explained to their citizens. So that is the stranglehold that the former colonizers still have on the countries that they colonized. So something had to give. So what Wandile, or the institutions that Wandile spoke about, had to be created. Institutions such as the African Union. However, in the case of the African Union, perhaps one of the things that we need to interrogate is the failures of the African Union to resolve the conflict in the continent and ensure that Africa is governed in the best interest of Africans. The conflict, if you follow what happened in Libya, the NATO's intervention there came as a result of the weaknesses of the African Union to actually intervene. Currently, there is even places in Mozambique whereby people cannot go to. I think there's a Cabo Delgado province whereby there's terrorists and rebels that are governing those countries. We know what is happening in the Central Africa when it comes to Congo, but the question would be, the failures of the African Union to actually step up and create that confidence that we could, as Africans, have our own institutions that will govern in our own interests. So what Splendid in Isolation achieves in doing is presenting for us not just the geopolitical dynamics of the day, but the alternative. That is why you find that Wandile spoke at great length about BRICS. BRICS, in our view, should be the future in terms of the aligning of countries that want to work together and make sure that they are able to trade with one another in a manner that does not undermine the sovereign interests of their respective countries. Now, Wandile spoke at great length about the US-led world order, which is facilitated by the IMF and the World Bank from an economical perspective. Also, practically, you would know how South Africa, especially during, I think since 2020, how much loans were actually borrowed by this government from the IMF and the World Bank. And what has been that impact of those loans to our economy and the livelihoods of our citizens. I think some of you would have listened to a speech. In fact, it was not a speech, but something that was said by the Minister of Electricity, where he's saying that the government had to close the Komati power station because of this funding that was given. I think it was $8.5 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Now, those are practically some of the conditions that are there. That is why, we need to interrogate most of the time. If we're getting a loan from an institution, what does it mean for us as a country when it comes to economy? What does it mean for our institutions? And if we are going to have two opposing or two different banks, one is saying, okay, I'm going to give you this loan for whatever purpose. Now, the conditions that I'm going to give you is that you just pay the installments and you finish paying off the loan in so many years. Another institution is saying to you, I'm going to give you this loan, but over and above giving you this loan, the condition is that, number one, you need to close some of the power stations and make use of alternative means of providing power, of which it is something that it is basically undermining our own right as Africans or our own rights as a country of self-determination. Look how when the conflict in Ukraine happened, these world powers wanted to sanction Russia. And after sanctioning Russia, they said, we're not going to buy gas from you. And at the same time, they're saying to other countries that you must move away from coal. Now, when they could not get gas from Russia, Germany, being one of those countries, went to South Africa, got the very same coal it was saying to South Africans, you must stop using coal. So that is how the world has organized itself. It has organized itself from a position of dominance to an extent whereby if you as a country, you do not, you do not have a strong sense of sovereignty whereby you can chart your own course of action, your own future. You are going to find yourself being dictated to by other countries as to your destiny. So what this book is actually doing is that from a historical perspective or geopolitical perspective, giving us what the institutions are there from the world perspective and the impact they are having on countries when it comes to the country's independence. Because independence, one of the questions that was asked I think it was in April, is whether indeed as a country are we independent. When we are saying we are independent, who are we independent from if we are going to be having countries or institutions that will dictate to us our policies that we need to take? So that is one of the things that the book is highlighting, basically. So after being looted by former colonial powers, many African countries in the past 60 years have been begging the IMF and the World Bank for assistance. However, the intention of these institutions, it is not to have these countries to be economically independent, because how they sustain their economies, whether it is Britain, it is France, it is the Americans, it is because of keeping other countries impoverished. And key to that, it is these economic or these financial institutions, such as the World Bank. Therefore, if you are going to go to such organizations as a country wanting assistance, rest assured those countries do not have your interest at heart. Those countries want to those institutions being used, of course, by the world superpowers, want to sustain the certain dominance in in the global order. So, the World Bank and the IMF does not come in to help uproot you from poverty. Instead, it is there to keep you in poverty. It is the same thing that happens at a micro level, whereby you have a loan. After having a loan, you get an SMS to say, if you want, you can have a top-up of your loan, or here's a credit card. That is what happens at a micro level with individuals. The intention there, it is to always keep you in poverty. So now, there are conditions that are kept when it comes to that. There are conditions that are given to any country that does business or requests loans from the IMF. And these stringent conditions, like I've stated, they are not in the interest of that respective country. Some of the structural adjustment policies in Africa, they increase poverty and unemployment. Now, some of these policies, you find that they lead to the privatization of the state-owned assets and therefore reducing public control over essential services. You've witnessed how in our own country, how much privatization has actually happened in the last few years, either from SAA, including the privatization of harbors at eThekwini, because of the relation that the current government is having with such institutions, that these institutions impose privatization as a means of keeping the stranglehold over our countries. Therefore, the emergence of BRICS is a very, very progressive development when it comes to geopolitics and our respective countries. Because, number one, BRICS has offered now a direct competition to the World Bank and to the IMF. And the countries that now need assistance, instead of going to these institutions, which is the IMF and the World Bank, they can go to the New Development Bank, which does not impose the very same conditions that these other countries have. Remember, the interest of BRICS, it is not this world domination that you have when it comes to the Americans. You can never speak to any American president without even them recognizing each other. I think they call each other the leader of the free world. Each and every president of America is always referred to as the leader of the free world, meaning how they view themselves is that they are there not only to lead America, but the entire world, the entire world. Therefore, these institutions that are led by them, they are there to perpetuate such stereotypes and such dominance, including the issue of, for example, the Security Council. The Security Council, it is not an institution that is there with the sole interest of making sure that it is providing law and order or is providing interventions when it comes to issues of security. It does so with a biased approach. Similarly, there was an arrest warrant that was issued for President Putin. However, you hear nothing about any action that would be taken by the ICC when it comes to the atrocities that are committed by Israel on Palestinians. Just recently, I was watching a video of there's some pipes that are used by agricultural farmers in Palestine, but there is a video whereby some institution from Israel is actually putting in cement so that the farmers from Palestine cannot access water. And once water is not accessible, it means they are not going to be in a space whereby they can farm and provide for Palestinians. However, silence from the ICC. So the biggest problem that we face in the world, it is institutions that are there that do not exist for the good, for the betterment of the world, but they exist for the betterment of few selected countries with such historical ties, to an extent whereby even if there is an invasion in Iraq for the sole purpose or the reason that is given, it is that they are looking for weapons of mass destruction. And when those weapons of mass destruction are not found, nothing is going to be said and done. So I do not want to spend a lot of time. I think Wandile has covered a lot in the book, so I want to submarine as well. Thank you.
Greetings one and all. Thank you to NMU for hosting us. It's our home, as some of you may know. So we are like the returned sons, Msomi and I. I'm very happy with Msomi for having picked me for this project, because it's just summing up many ideas that him and I have been discussing on for years. But to not waste time, what I want to engage upon is the issue around Africa and shaping a future, or what sort of future Africa could shape. I'll begin this with just a few quotes from Hosea Jaffe, which is a professor, academic from South Africa, in particular to Europe and Africa, to sort of bring about the importance of Africa, because perhaps some of us may not see or may not think we are that important as a continent, not just as a country. And I quote, Europe was then neither a concept nor a reality, at most a vague idea that Arabs, but not Europeans, had long ago of some place northwest of Greece. Another quote, Europe was born out of colonialism as the exploiting, oppressing, negating pole that tried to destroy and assimilate its opposite pole, the rest of the world. Sorry for this. Okay, so with this engagement in this book, we offer the view that Africa has an important role to play in the international arena, and this is a role of advocating for the liberation of oppressed peoples and nations, fostering peace and cooperation in the world, and the protection of the environment and animals. Now, despite whatever misgivings that Africa may have, we need to ensure that Africa works within the current geopolitical milieu or geopolitical setup with the sole intention of exposing its unfairness, its limitations, and inconsistencies with regards to implementing its own laws and its own policies. There must never be a point, though, where we operate in a docile manner within a system and a geopolitical or economic world order that has its genesis in our exploitation and our oppression. as such, we appreciate the discourse that has been advanced by the Minister of International Relations, Dr. Naledi Pandor, where she exposed the unfairness and inconsistent nature of the West when it comes to the Ukraine-Russian war. Dr. Pandor pointed out that the West was being inconsistent in its advocating for human rights, territorial integrity, and sovereignty for Ukraine and its people, when such was never a thought during the yesteryear's wars of imperialist plunder, particularly wars that were perpetuated in the global south. Furthermore, Dr. Pandor highlighted another inconsistency of the West, that of seeking to now shift or move high-level decisions in the United Nations, removing them from the United Nations Security Council and taking them to the General Assembly, where instead of where in the Security Council, because they know that it can easily be vetoed. Say, for instance, the Russia-Ukraine war, to have Russia to remove its forces or to be condemned, Russia could easily veto that position. So the inconsistency that Dr. Pandor was highlighting was that nations of the global south had long been advocating for a move from a small clique in the Security Council, taking decisions that are incumbent upon all of us, and having it to be more democratic, allowing the entire world, or majority of the countries, as in those that are represented in the UN GA, to be able to vote on issues that will be impacting on all of us. We'd like to say that we should not lose sight, as we work within the system though, as a continent of Africa, we should not lose sight of the goal, because working within the system is a means to an end. The end that we as Africans should be envisioning is one where this current system, which has left us impoverished, has caused suffering for millions of people, and left many of us destitute, to be done away with, so that we can usher in a new system grounded on humanity, cooperation, and care for the earth and life for all. This claim we make while seeking wisdom from the great scholar Walter Rodney, who reminds us that every African has a responsibility to understand the system, to not only understand the system, but to work for its overthrow. So it is important for all of us in Africa to understand these institutions, as Uwa has stated, the United Nations, the IMF, institutions that Honorable Zungul has stated, the political situation with Israel and Palestine, so that we can not only work to understand it, but to seek its overthrow. In closing, I'd like to say the future that Africa should seek to shape is one that is free from perpetual wars and conflicts, environmental degradation, and the oppression of one human by another. It should be a world that is free from economic destruction brought about by unilaterally imposed sanctions and trade embargoes and all forms of fear-mongering. Africa must advocate for a world that is free from, say for instance, in America, as Uwa has stated, to impose sanctions on Zimbabwe, highlighting it as these sanctions are sanctions based off policies by Mugabe. But now Mugabe has long gone, but those sanctions still remain and are not likely to be removed anytime soon. That world at its core is about the provision of all human needs, such as shelter, sanitation, clothing, healthcare, and the use of all scientific and technological advances for the betterment of all people. That is the future that Africa should seek and advocate for to shape. I thank you.
Thank you to all of the speakers today. I think as the young leaders of Africa, we have a lot to interrogate in terms of where we find ourselves and where we should endeavor to be. To engage precisely that, I'm going to open up the question and answer session. Comrades, I will ask that we please keep our submissions succinct. We are not looking for secondary respondents. We are looking for short questions, short comments, and I will be very strict, comrades. You can shout at me later. 1, 2, 2. Oh, okay. Okay, 3, 4. Bizane.
At the back.
Did I tell 4, comrades? Booty. I'm taking 4 hands. Bizane.
Okay, thanks. In the interest of time, I'm very short. I have a lot to say. Okay, sure. Mr. Msomi. Mynheer Msomi, I haven't read your book, by the way, so I'm not going to comment much on the book itself, but I'll just comment on the poster, which I believe to be cover of the book, which was circulated. I had hoped that they would depict it here so that I can refer to it and everyone can see what I'm talking about. But I noticed that the picture depicts, certain leaders on the top and then certain leaders at the bottom. And I was just wondering, maybe is that a form of metaphoric expression to depict maybe the global, power relations and how unevenly those power relations are, how evenly they are distributed in the world stage. Because I noticed that when it comes to African leaders, they are not as prominent in terms of the size of the images in the book. Yeah, that's a question for you. And then a question for our member of parliament who's present. You spoke a lot about dominance, and when I think about that word, I also think about hegemony, and now as this TikTok generation, as we are being referred to, now I'm thinking about the institutions of popular culture, we watch a lot of Netflix, social media, even music, we engage a lot on those. And I'm just wondering, all these institutions of popular culture, what is their role in maintaining or reproducing these uneven, power relations and dominance that you are referring to? Thank you.
Number 2.
Switch the mic on.
Yeah, can you hear me? Is it fine?
Please use this one.
Sure. No, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. So, of course, I think my question is very much straightforward and simple. But I think before I give that question, perhaps maybe I must give a context. I'm not trying to be a secondary, respondent, as you said. But I don't think it will make sense, perhaps, if I just put it like in that way, So, of course, I'll use South Africa, of course, as as example, because I think there are too many examples that we can use. But, I will use South Africa because I believe that everybody is aware with that situation. Of course, there's this misconception that, capital is organized, and capital that reigned supreme during, of course, the negotiations of a democratic dispensation. Of course, one would call it a negotiated, political settlement, because we don't believe that there is democracy in South Africa. Because if you talk about democracy, you might be accused of too many things. So, of course, now we're talking about de-dollarization. And I want us to look at this, with a seriousness that it deserves. Because if you talk about, capital, a seriousness that it deserves. Because if you talk about, capital, even now, there are part of capital that are not benefiting, that are not making profit out of, what is happening now. And of course, they are going to come and push for the de-dollarization because they are also suffering. So I want us to also check it, that we do not fall victim again, where we push for things that, have no, with ourselves as a people, who are not going to benefit. So I want us to look at, or perhaps if you can assist us speakers, in terms of in whose economic interest is the de-dollarization. Of course, I must put a disclaimer that we support the de-dollarization, but we must understand, just like with apartheid, we supported that there must not be apartheid on our people, but our people, even today when there's no apartheid, they're still suffering. We might de-dollarize, but still, not be able to benefit. So, of course, we must be able to note and investigate in whose economic interest is the de-dollarization. Thank you so much.
Number 3, next to you, Bonzo.
Thank you. My name is Oloitu Awoga. I'm a student here at the Nelson Mandela University. I want to pose a question to both the speakers. I think they have made reference to BRICS, the institution that South Africa is a part of. So I just have a question based on that reference. South Africa today, if we have a conclave lenses, we would understand that we do not have state capacity to begin with. All our SOEs are beginning to be liquidated and privatized. There is absolutely nothing that we as South Africa can, for lack of a better word, contribute towards institutions that want to, or rather that have, that seek to develop the world to a better place. What is the role of South Africa in the institution that is called BRICS? What do they contribute? And how far-lived will our relationship be with BRICS? We understand that we have a long-lived history with the countries that are members of BRICS. They have supported us during times of apartheid. But now, what is the contribution of South Africa towards this institution? Yeah, my question was based on that. Thank you very much.
Number 4.
Good evening. I would like to ask 2 short questions. My first question is regarding the proposed BRICS currency. Do you think it has the potential to topple the dollar's hegemony in the world economy? And my second question is regarding South Africa's influence in the BRICS alliance. How can they leverage the influence to assist other fellow African nations? Thank you.
I'll hand over to the speakers. You can have a quick conference to decide who goes first. You'll go first. Okay.
I'll go first, and there's only 2 questions I'm taking. The main man for tonight is the one that will answer most of the questions. The first question was on the question of the popular culture. If I can quote a song by Bob Marley when he spoke about mental slavery, there is no way in which the people that colonized us can continue with their dominance over us or our countries without any form of mental slavery. So that is why you find that the popular culture, which is your TikToks, your Facebook, some of these TV shows, they are there to perpetuate a certain narrative. If you watch a movie on Netflix that is based on either Mexico or Colombia, look at the color there, it's dusty. Whereas we were talking about 2023, it should not be of that nature. Versus the very same, something that is similar but on a country that maybe it has a good relations with the Americans, it is fine. Again, look at how other countries actually want to control the influence that is there. That is why if you go to some countries, Facebook is banned, over TikTok are banned, and some TV shows are not allowed there. It is because they want to protect the minds of their citizens. So I would say that some of these things, they actually help to maintain the dominance of these institutions over us. That is why on the question of anything that has, sometimes you listen to people that are going to defend Americans with their lives because of the influence that is there, because most of our TV shows are American inspired. Therefore, that is why abantu are going to defend the very same institution that is known, Okoba, it is basically contributed to the devastation of many lives. The role of South Africa in BRICS, I think the most important element when it comes to BRICS is that it is an institution that we are part of and we are a decision maker. Put aside ezinye izinto that will follow, but the fact that South Africa now has got an opportunity, okanye is part of an institution that it is a decision maker in, that on its own shows the importance of BRICS. And obviously, when you're a decision maker, you are able to influence the nature of the decisions to be within interest yako, and also to use your influence in that institution to try and resolve some of the domestic issues that you may have, which include the lack of state capacity. But for that to happen, you need an administration in the country that will be working closer with that institution, which is BRICS, not to have a BRICS that is there with all of the promises and the potential it might have, but have an administration that is leaning more towards the West and undermine the very institution that our own country is part of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I received very difficult questions. Msomi and I had an agreement that the difficult questions will be handled by him. But on the cover, yes, the cover is very interesting. I do get questioned a lot on the cover, and I understand. You have President Putin right there, President Xi Jinping right at the center, and of course, Uncle Joe. Right there. And then you have these African leaders, the pictures are smaller, they're at the bottom. I think you answered yourself when you're asking the question. It's a reality. It's a reality we live in, whether we like it or not. Russia is a superpower. China is a superpower. I mean, they're going to surpass the US. I'm not sure when they said that might happen, but very soon. I mean, the US is intimidated by that and trying to delay that process as much as they can. And of course, the United States of America. I don't have to explain. But this is the reality we live in. I didn't get a question on why these specific people, so I'm not going to get it. Maybe if you asked that, I was going to answer. But you missed the opportunity. So, former president of the SRC also asked a very difficult question. But it's true, the comment that you made. Sometimes we all want the same thing, but not for the same reasons. That's why we have to interrogate. Even the most noble of things you interrogate. Why is this person who was okay with apartheid yesterday, all of a sudden is now saying he's against apartheid? Yet you've been against apartheid ever since. What's in it for him? You know, you have to interrogate that question. What's in it for? The problem with money and capital, they benefit from everything. We speak about peace in Middle East. There are people making money from that war because there's someone manufacturing those weapons. You know, if the war ends, you know, that his pockets will shrink. So he wants that war to continue. So we have to interrogate. Even this de-dollarization, what will replace it? We must interrogate, how we benefit from that as well. So we can't just be overly excited and then we end up sleepwalking ourselves into yet another problem that will take another 100 years to fix. So, but then I'm just going to jump to, because it's similar to the one on whether with the proposed BRICS currency, and how we don't know yet how that will definitely look like. Hopefully we get more certainty after the BRICS summit. But I did mention it earlier, the aim here is not to topple the dollar. The aim here is to neutralize the dollar. The aim here is to bring an alternative. The aim here is to allow people to choose. If you want to conduct this transaction using a dollar, you have to have the right to say, let's use a dollar, let's use a rand, let's use the Chinese, So that's the aim. It's not necessary to topple. Obviously, it decreases, because anything that is being diluted, it gets weaker. But it doesn't mean it disappears. It just gets weaker, So that's what they're trying to, obviously, that's what we're trying to achieve. When I say we, I'm now putting myself in BRICS. So now the role of South Africa within BRICS, that question can be understood in two ways. And obviously we could be here the whole night if we interrogate like everything. But what I've noticed is, I don't think South Africans particularly, I'll include myself as well, I don't think we fully understand the importance of South Africa in the world. Why are so many people fighting over us? Why are they not fighting? Oh, and we wrote in the book, I'm not going to take long, I'm just going to, a few seconds. We wrote in the book about the highly rich uranium that South Africa has. President Bush contacted President Mbeki, said, listen, you have highly rich uranium in South Africa, bring it to America for safekeeping. President Mbeki said, no, we're fine, we can take care of. That was after the break-in at Pelindaba, because that's where we keep it. Then President Mbeki said, no, it's fine, we will keep our highly rich uranium. President Zuma came in, President Obama wrote President Zuma about 2 or 3 letters speaking about the same thing, saying, bring this thing, or if you're not going to give it to us, dilute it, because it's highly rich. This is what Iran is sanctioned for trying to have. We already have it. Many South Africans don't know that we are, in some circles, depending on your definition, we can be considered a nuclear power, not because we have nuclear weapons, but because of the speed in which we can get them, if we wanted them. And even though the apartheid government, did that thing, but the good thing that, from getting rid of our nuclear weapons, the good thing that the apartheid government did in that respect was keeping that highly rich uranium, because that's the key. That's what the North Koreans, the Arabs want. We already have it. So, but South Africans, we don't know much about that. So we need to educate ourselves a lot about South Africa and South Africa's role in the world and its importance in the world, and then we can understand its importance in BRICS. It wasn't a mistake. Out of 193 countries that South Africa is there. It's not a mistake. It's not charity. They need us there. And we need to understand they need us, and we need to be comfortable saying the world needs South Africa, and we need to interrogate the importance of just South Africa in the world. We are really important to a whole lot of people. That is why when the ambassador said what they said about Lady R, I tweeted, I was responding to another tweet by another politician. And I explained to him that, if it was true, firstly, it wasn't going to happen like this. Secondly, sanctioning South Africa, they're not going to do that. It's not going to happen. And there's a reason for that, and that's what we have to interrogate and try to study and learn more about our country. Thank you.
All right, colleagues, I'm going to open up a second round of questions. This is a very unique gift, thanks to the discipline of our speakers. In fact, everyone who has spoken here. A second round of questions. Okay, I'll start from this side now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. Number 1, Wonga.
Thank you. My name is Wongaletu Simaile. I have a comment and maybe a question as well. I think I agree with you that the West will not sanction South Africa because of its unique position and whatnot, all those other economic aspects of that. But let's look at BRICS. I love the question about BRICS. China's biggest trade partner is the US, I believe. Brazil's biggest trade partner is China, and then the second biggest one is America. Russia doesn't trade as much with the US, but it trades with the West. And then India's biggest trade partner is China. No, it's the US. And so the members of BRICS are trading with the West. Those are they have their biggest trade partners as the West, the US, the same US that threatens sanctions every once in a while because of our alignment or non-alignment to Russia. So my question is, and I think it's related to Poncho's question, on whether the discussion should be alliance to the West or non-alliance or alliance to Russia. Shouldn't be the discussion be South Africa, how can we self-determine to the point that it doesn't matter who we are aligned with politically or not? Because, for example, let's make it an example with Russia. It's less than 1% of trade that we have between us and Russia. But with the US and the European Union, it's 30%. So economically, does it make more sense to align with Russia if that alignment threatens that trade that we have with the West? So I think we shouldn't be discussing alignment. I think South Africa should remain non-aligned and self-determined to the point that it doesn't matter whether we trade with China or Russia, because we should look at what benefits us as a people. Does de-dollarization benefit us? Maybe it does to some extent, but the focus should be how do we benefit in all of this? Because we can't just align with Russia at the expense of our people, at the expense of our economy, because we have to be realistic as well. I understand the history we have with Russia politically and whatnot, but we are here now, it's 2023. Is it better to be aligned with Russia or the West economically now? Thank you.
Number 2.
Botani nonke igama lami ngu-Azani. Umbuzo wami mna ungqale on the last speaker. I wanted to, because he was speaking on the stance of Africa and the advocacy of Africa being peace and, holding hands with the world. I wanted to understand, I want to ask that should Africa actually seek to sing Kumbaya with the world, or rather take a realist stance like Russia a realist or military stance, rather than to always become a victim of circumstance, because as the Speaker of Parliament mentioned, that other countries, other international actors are seeking for dominance over and over. So should we want to just be peaceful, or we should actually take care of our security and work towards that? Thank you.
Number 3.
Special greetings to Uwandile and Honorable Zungula. Extended greetings to all members present today. Firstly, I'd like to just start off by a comment. I'd like to commend your efforts and support to Wandile, Honorable Zungula, likewise to the young generation that's present here today from UTNAIC, I think, high school. I think it's commendable that the teachers also brought them here. And yes, just getting on to the question. I don't doubt BRICS. I don't doubt BRICS as an alternative to the development of emerging economies. I'd just like to ask, do you think is it not necessary for us to withdraw from other bodies that we have tied ourselves to in order to strengthen our relationship within BRICS and with BRICS as a whole? The second question is it also not necessary, I think these questions are all tied up, is it also not necessary that there is a synchronization of policy in terms of us withdrawing from other bodies that would have been aligned to the West in order to strengthen our relationship within BRICS and with BRICS going forward? By that I mean, firstly, BRICS comes at the right time, noting that within Africa as a whole, there are developments of policies and bodies and institutions that seek to advance Africa outside looking at our ties with other, global institutions and bodies, such as the Free Continental Trade Agreement. I think it's significant and it complements our involvement with BRICS. So by that, by synchronizing, I mean noting that BRICS has a development bank that seeks to be an alternative of the World Bank and the IMF. Is it not also necessary that the African Free Continental Trade Body also has that? Is it not also necessary that member states, countries that are part of BRICS also have state-owned banks that they can have a say and sort of facilitate in collaboration with the development banks that would be coming from BRICS, from African Free Trade, Continental Trade Agreement, and various other bodies that seem to be taking a progressive stance in terms of the development of emerging economies? Those are the two questions. Thank you.
Number 4.
Thank you, ma'am. I think to both speakers, thanks so much for making us as school UTNAIC aware of the complications that we basically deal with on a micro level. When you look at poverty, we can't just now say that it's internal, and I think we're trying to get the reasons on a much larger scale. The impact of these international relations as such, and how it created institutionalized racism to a large extent, and how that filters down, to in our psychology and into our understanding of doing business, and the frustrations, I think, many times in the South African context of adopting those kind of ideas that rightfully you are saying that is being imposed upon us. I just wonder, hypothetically speaking, if you look at the impact that these negative relations or, business and institutions, international institutions basically forcing us to do certain things, hypothetically speaking, to what extent does that contribute to our internal struggles, such as, poverty, and linked to that societal issues such as corruption, etc. Because we tend to think of poverty is created only by internal struggles and corruption, etc. But To what extent would both speakers agree that it's actually on a much larger international scale that actually has these influences on us as society, and that is basically, tying our hands in terms of economic growth? Thank you.
Over to the speakers. Was there a fifth hand, comrades? No, I don't believe so. Over to the speakers.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank goodness. Okay. So, with alignment and saying, I think you made mention about the conversation shouldn't be around who to align ourselves with and so on, rather perhaps looking at things like self-determination, deciding, depending on the situation and so on, if I understood you correctly. But the book, and I explained that, I think, when I was explaining Splendid Isolation. It's a question, right? In fact, it's a proposed answer to the question. Who should we align ourselves with? East, West, or should we be non-aligned, right? And what benefits come from this alignment and that alignment, right? I happen to come from the school of thought, Tuguti. We owe our allegiance to no one. Right? I don't think we have very close relations with certain countries. There's that history that's there, but I don't think now we need to become slaves of that country or that region. It depends. If Russia is correct today, Russia is correct. If they are wrong, right? But we cannot say because Russia and America don't get along, now we're gonna move with the Russians. No, we can, I think, perhaps decide on take political stance, but continue with relations with both East, West, and so on. So we can't really say we are loyal to the Americans, even if we have trade, right, with the Americans, and obviously they're big, they're massive economy, right? China as well. Right, so we can't just haphazardly tomorrow say, America is bad, we don't want to. China is trading with them, and they are fighting for dominance themselves. So I agree with what you're saying. I'm just going back to the earlier, like the very first point I made when I was speaking out just about Splendid Isolation. I come from the same school of thought as you. The second question, I think, was for Untul. And then on the withdrawing from bodies that perhaps may compromise our relationship with BRICS or maybe BRICS nations, I don't know. I do not think we should look at ICC, for example. I don't think we should. I believe we should withdraw from the ICC, but not because of our relations with Russia. That's being controlled, right? We need to withdraw from the ICC on principle. The ICC has been targeting African leaders, right? They have been targeting leaders that are opposed to the West, right? I was shocked when the arrest warrant came for Vladimir Putin, not because I don't think he deserves it or whatever, because of how quick it was. They have been investigating Netanyahu for years. And Honorable Zungula was speaking about something that we can all see on Twitter, that video that was posted of cement being poured in to prevent the Palestinians from getting access to water and so on. It's there, Yet Vladimir Putin can get, a case can be laid, and in a few months later there's an arrest warrant. No arrest warrant for the other folks. I don't know if I should mention their names, but I think we know them, So that's the principle. That's why we should leave the ICC. Not because there's an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. No, we can't. We cannot be I think there's a word that is used a lot in politics, reactionary. So we can't be reactionary, you know. The last question was a very good question on external pressures and how they influence domestic politics. It's true that not all of our problems in this country originate from this country. You know, a lot of the problems we have come from outside, from external. I mean, we spoke about IMF. If we can, let's say we're a political party here and we're in government or we're in parliament, and we decide we want to nationalize land, for example, or the banks or whatever. And then IMF says, you can't do that. You agreed when we gave you that $7 billion, or you agreed when we gave you that $70 billion that you're not going to speak nationalization. So sometimes these people agree with nationalization, but they signed, you know, and said, we're not going to nationalize, just give us the money, you know. So then now you cannot go into issues of land, for example. You can't deal with land because there's an issue. You can't deal with issues about the banks, ESCOM, all these, SAA, you know. So you can't deal with a whole lot of these issues that have direct impact in people's lives because there's a signature there of a minister of finance or a president agreeing that they're not going to take this radical step, if I can call it radical. Some of these things, they call it radical. It's not really radical, it's logical. But now you can't take certain positions that to save people's lives. For example, poverty. If someone says, listen, I'm in poverty, but if you just give me a plot of land, I don't need a lot of things, just a plot of land. Let me, you know, but you can't do that, you know. So because of some of these agreements that you have signed outside and the pressures, right? Zimbabwe, it's not a really good example because they kind of messed it up a little bit themselves in terms of how they manage their land expropriation. But now, because of the West has now, or America, America has now set an example on Zimbabwe. You know, that's why when people speak about land, they say, hey, Zimbabwe, because now they've set an example that if you speak about this thing, you are going to be Zimbabwe, you know. But they don't speak about land expropriation in China, you know, which was a huge success, you know. So, yeah, thank you very much.
I will hand over to both our speakers to do their closing remarks, and then the Nikezele ku Bekai program. Honorable Zungula.
Thank you. You know, there's a saying, if you want peace, you need to prepare for war. Because, like Wandile stated in his example, if I have a gun, you have a gun, we're going to both equally respect each other. But if there's one person that has got the willpower and the capabilities of destroying the other person, and the other person does not have the capabilities of defending themselves, there'll always be dominance. The reason why Russia is able to withstand all of the so-called sanctions from the European Union and some of these other countries, it is because of it has run in its economy and its military and its country in a manner that is self-sustainable. So we need to fight or drive for Africa and South Africa to be self-sustainable. It cannot be that we are going to be told that there's some increase in the prices of, is it fish oil, because of the grain from Ukraine. You know, whereas we've got so much land in the continent. However, some of these issues, they are influenced by the nature of the governments that we have. So we need as young people to agitate for governments that will actually drive drive the continent towards a more self-sustainable countries. Self-sustainable countries, there's always going to be peace, there's going to be prosperity, there's going to be general respect for those countries because they are sustainable. But weaker countries, anyone can do whatever they want to do because you don't have the willpower to defend yourself. The last thing from my side is to just highlight some of the domestic issues. In fact, not even highlight some of the domestic issues, but just to say, we know and we see the state of our country. And the biggest voter bloc in our country is always young people. However, it is the young people that do not participate in their own governance. So all of these discussions are meaningless if we do not shape our future as young people through the process of voting. So over and above capacitating our minds, let's make sure that come next year, we shape the direction of our own country. First thing is that we need to vote. A lot of people do not want, are saying voting does not help, whereas in 1994, the apartheid government was removed by what? By voting. And it cannot be that now we're going to accept a narrative, voting does not help. You know, I was worried when Dr. Umar came to South Africa and he said, Africans must not vote, because he's effectively saying, let's surrender our power to the minority that will vote, and they will vote for their own people. It is our own people that will govern in the interest of the minority. So that is why we need to take an active stand and shape the direction of our country, and we need to support each other as young people. And whenever a young person has managed to enter in a certain facility, in a certain building, keep the door open so that other young people are able to enter. I think the past couple of years, especially for us, the majority, we've seen there needs to be a change in mentality. The capitalist mentality that is dominating most of our minds as society is not taking us anywhere. We need to have a society that we're more concerned about the bigger or broader community goals. Now, we need to find our own mission as young people. In 2023, where are we? And what should be our mission? And we are all committed towards that particular mission, and not find ourselves we are participating in our own governance from a messianic point of view. There's this messianic politics that we have in our country, whereby people, they want to pin all of their hopes, all of their everything on an individual. They are not saying, let's come together, agree to say this is our mission. Now, regardless what happens to this individual that we elect to do 1, 2, 3, if he fails, we put someone else that is going to continue our mission. What made apartheid to actually, to eventually die or to eventually get removed, it was because all people were united towards that particular mission of removing apartheid. So, us in 2023, let's find our own mission as young people, and let's fight so that our own children get to inherit a better country. I thank you.
I'm going to try and just keep it at 30 seconds.
You don't have to.
I was just saying. But yeah, mine, what's interesting in the United States, and I watch a lot of debates, and now, it's election season, so those debates are coming back, I think, later this year. Something interesting that happens when I watch these politicians in the US, debate, they always, I think the first part of the question, or the first round, or the second part of the questions for the night, it's always foreign policy. And in South Africa, we never ask political leaders, so what's your foreign policy objective? That's not for America to ask foreign. South Africa must have a foreign policy objective. China has it. If we want to be counted amongst the great nations of the world, You know, we can't overlook foreign policy. When the US has a foreign policy objective for Southern Africa and for South Africa, yet South Africa doesn't have a foreign policy objective on America and on China and on Europe. So I'm happy to see everybody here. We're engaging more and more with international relations, with foreign affairs. South Africans are now getting more and more involved. I want us to, to keep it up, try and read as much as we can, of course, starting with Splendid Isolation. But yeah, thank you very much. That's just my thoughts. Thank you very much for your support and your presence here. It means a lot to us. Thank you very much.
Comrade Mzo.
Greetings once again. Thank you to Nelson Mandela University for hosting us. Thank you for Kenred. Thank you to my brother Wandile Msomi for the book and for pitching me in there to contribute. Thanks to Honorable Zungula for honoring the invite. Thanks to everyone who came, because it was a bit touch and go in certain instances, but we do very much appreciate the fact that we got a full house, so thank you very much for that. I think with that way, to wanted to ask something. I don't have time, perhaps we could engage outside if she's willing. But in essence, let's continue. People oftentimes we say this thing of aluta continue. I'm sure a lot of us know it here. Let's really do it or put it at that. The struggle does really continue. As Msomi was saying of us, of other countries or America or Russia and so on having a foreign policy on us, as a result of our colonization, we have always been at the receiving end. We are always the ones who are told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and so on and so forth. We are always the ones who are being dictated to, and that in itself should tell us that the struggle continues. I'm happy to see younger kids in high school. When I was in high school, I never got an opportunity for this. So it is incumbent upon you, as I said, to paraphrase Dr. Walter Rodney, to destroy the system of colonialism, to destroy the system of capitalism. Thank you very much.
Comrades, is the representative from the international office here? International office? All right. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Uvuyo again. Also, sends a closing. Closing.
Hello. Good evening once again, comrades. And mine is very short once again. I'd just like to say thank you to our author, Mr. Wandile Msomi, for writing such a positive book that can speak unto many issues that we can relate to as well. He was my classmate, by the way. He was my classmate, and it's very good to see people that you were in the trenches with, so to say, doing the most in this thing called life and paving the way for other people, especially the youth. So I'm very proud of you, my brother. And I hope that there will be another edition of Splendid Isolation. With Comrade Zungula, thank you very much for honoring the invite. On behalf of our director, Professor Begim Gomezulu, he would have loved to be here, but unfortunately, he had another commitment to attend to. He said that, in fact, he wrote a letter to you that I need to hand over. He would have loved to be here, and he says, thank you for honoring the invite. Comrade Mzo, another one of my classmates. Hey, Buffett. What am I doing with my life? So once again, my leader, thank you very much for honoring the invite as well. It's very good once again to see you because it's been a very long time. It's very nice to have comrades once again being in the space of academia and taking up the activism within the academic space. To the rest of the comrades that are here, thank you so much for attending Canred events. We are nothing without you. You are the biggest constituency that we have, and we want to bring Canred back to the ground. So we're going to end with Gwichos, and we're going to move in that direction and bring Canred back to the ground. Unfortunately, there's one issue. Ne? Again, Msomi spoke about the economy. Ne? Cyril's economy, comrades, does not allow for refreshments. Yeah, so I'll just like to make that apology. There are no refreshments outside. And thank you very much. So there's a bit of a slight delay. There's a bit of a slight delay with Mandla.
High discipline, high morale.
So there's a bit of a slight delay with catering, comrades, né? So can we just ask that, Jay, for 5 minutes, we have a smaller networking session with one another, and then we'll make an announcement once the catering has arrived. Thank you very much. Just one more thing. Can you please just remain in the venue so that we don't disrupt the processes outside, please? Jay, just 5 minutes to remain in the venue.
When you leave, please take your bottles with